everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Tess Ryan and today I thought I'd like to talk about 12 things about grief. I don't know if any of you watched my other videos which were about domestic violence and what I went through there, being abused in an abusive relationship with a narcissist and then being stalked. And this is a continuation story. I will be referring to some of my life, but also things about grief that I thought may help anybody going through it freshly, or anybody who are around somebody going through it at the stage. It is a very insidious state of mind, grief, and it does take time to go through it, and I just wanted to point out all the things surrounding grief that went on when I went through it. A couple of years after my abusive relationship, I did meet somebody and we ended up moving in together. We got a house, moved out to the country. But because I had gone through that domestic violence, I didn't want to commit to a marriage again, as it was so hard getting out of it. It was just the state of mind that I was in, and I was quite messed up at the time. I was going through post-traumatic stress at the time and went through this for several years after the abusive relationship. But one thing I did find with this new relationship, it did put me on the path to healing myself. Anyway, we moved up to this small country town. There wasn't much work in the town, so my de facto ended up having to go back to Melbourne to work. So we quite often went down to Melbourne through the week and came back on the weekends. During this time we had a daughter, and nine years into it, when our daughter was 9 years old, my de facto went to work one Monday morning. He was leaving to go to work and I went to work. I was working on a trout farm at the time, and I got a phone call saying that he had been taken to a medical centre because he'd suffered chest pains and had a heart attack. The first initial feeling that I felt at that time was numbness and denial. I didn't believe it. I thought because he had had a cold before that, that perhaps they were wrong, that he was just suffering with a bit of bad bronchitis or something like that. I was in complete denial, but of course, as the events turned out, he had passed away. He had a fatal heart attack. There had been no history of it in the past. There had been warning signs, but at that stage, him being a male, a lot of males, they just ignore what they're going through, their symptoms, and just take it on the chin and keep going on. Well, he didn't listen to the signs, and he did have that fatal heart attack, and everything they tried, they couldn't bring him back. Because this was quite of a shock, I went through a very deep grief and shock. It was very hard to get through at the time, and it sent me spiralling into a state of fogginess, and I was away in the clouds somewhere. I suffered quite badly at the time. Anyway, I want to go through 12 things that I went through while I was going through this grief, and things that I did take note of that others around me were doing, or what went on, in a hope that if you know anybody who is going through the same thing, through fresh grief that's just happened, or you're looking for answers, or anybody who is close to another person going through grief, that hopefully one of these things may help you, it may not. And I do believe probably anyone who is going through grief will already know all these things, but I am just putting it down in an itemised form, that perhaps one thing you may pick up and think, get the aha moment, and it may help you. So here goes. Number one is, the first thing I noticed was nothing ever stays the same. So the one thing I did realise was that don't ever think that it's not going to happen to you, because it can and it does. You look on TV and you see people losing other people and things going on, and you always believe in your own mind, that'll never happen to me, but it does. It does happen to you. And it completely changes your whole life, losing a person that's close to you. And that's one thing that you need to do, is with your loved ones, always appreciate them around you, spend wonderful times with them, and always know that you're lucky to have your loved ones there, because you just never know when something may happen and you may lose them. Not that it's good to live in dread, live each moment like as though it's your first. That's one thing I did learn through going through grief, and I also learned that the trivial things are just trivial. The everyday life of debt and worry and things like that, they all seem very trivial and minor. When you're going through grief, you realise how stupid it is. You realise that it's nothing compared to losing someone and knowing that you're not going to see them. Number 2 going through was consider that all things happen for a reason. And this is quite a hard thing to do when you're going through grief. You won't sit there consciously and say, why did this happen? There's a good reason for this. Of course, you're not going to feel that, because grief is very insidious. It will take hold of your emotional, spiritual and mental mind and completely upturn it on its head. So you're not going to ask why. But when I went through my grief, I did ask why. I thought, why? I couldn't understand it. He was so young. He was only 45 years old. He'd only lived half of his life, and I wanted to know why. Why did this happen? And I didn't actually see it until years and years after. Years and years after, I realised why it happened, and I accepted the fact that it wasn't all about me, it was about him too. That was his life path, and when he was born, he had a set time to pass away as well. And obviously the things that he'd done through his life, he'd done and completed, and it was just his time. It wasn't anyone to blame for it, it was just his time. And this is another thing that you may go through when you're going through your grief. You'll feel blame, you'll feel guilt, you'll think, what could I have done different? But you couldn't have done anything different, it was just their time. But they had a special place in your life. Your life would not be complete the way it is now unless they had have been in your life. And every person that comes along, they add something to your life. They add something to the story of your life. And you gather all these things together, and it's what makes you the person that you are. Number 3 was, everyone has their own degree of suffering and way of coping. And this is so true, because when I lost my partner, I found each of my children acted completely different to what I did. I wanted to talk about him all the time. I was bringing his name up every single day, several times a day, and he was always the name on the table. I never let it go. I was not going to let him be forgotten. Whereas one of my children, they were so angry, they were just angry at everything, and that was the way they handled their grief. Another one was in total denial. She absolutely hated me saying his name. She didn't want to think about him. It was just too painful for her. And the other one, just the way he handled it was pretend it didn't happen. He just carried on with his life and walked through his life, did the usual things, and that was his coping mechanism. Other people, if you've lost a very close person, and I'm particularly talking about if you've lost your life partner like I did, they can act in very strange ways. Once again, your mind has been altered. Your mind pattern is completely upturned, and you may feel like you're mental, you feel like you're numb, you're feeling guilty, you're feeling angry, sad, and it goes around in a cycle. It continues to go around in the cycle, and because of the way you're feeling, you might act and do things different. With me, the way I coped, this was after the funeral and after we had to get along with life. I went to work and I worked it out. I just worked so hard to try and forget, and I tried to be away from the house where we had our life together, and I just worked and worked, and in the end I worked so hard that I ended up having health issues myself. But other people may act different as well. Some people might go on a binge with and get into drugs. Others may feel that they need to party on, Others may feel differently. There might be people, and particularly in the case where you've lost a partner, it is particularly hard being your life partner. They're the ones that you bare your soul to. You come home and you tell them your innermost secrets. You come home and you vent to them. You come home and you ask advice of them, and all of a sudden they've been taken away. They're not there, and you'll be doing something in your day, and this happened to me several times. I'd be at work, something would happen, I'd hear something and I'd think, oh, I'll have to go home and tell Ellen about that, and then I thought, oh no, he's not there, he's gone, and it was a habit form that I had to get out of. But once again, having that person gone, you can't confide in them. So some people may feel that they need that closeness and that intimacy. So it's quite common for a person to go out and find another partner, just to feel that intimacy. It didn't happen that way with me, but it can happen, and it does happen with others. But like I say, if you're looking on, don't judge the person. They're going through grief and they're trying to cope and get through their grief in the best way that they know how to. Right, the next one I have is don't make hasty life changes. This is very, very important if you're going through grief. When I say hasty life changes, it can be moving house. Sometimes when you're in so much pain, you want to get away from that pain and move away. Well, eventually I did move away, but I gave myself plenty of time. It was about 8 years after that I decided I had so much pain in that house, I wanted to get up and leave and find another place to live. Now that was fine, that was 8 years down the track, but what I'm saying is don't make these life decisions where you change so much that you've changed your whole life and then down the track you're going to regret it. And this quite often happens. It's not just in changing where you live, it may be changing your job, it may be getting a new partner, and quite often this is quite a big problem, and I'm speaking from experience here because I did that. It was 3 years after the death of my de facto. I got married to my next husband, but it didn't work because I still was suffering. I hadn't worked through that grief and it just didn't work. As much as I tried and I wanted it to work, it didn't work because I was still suffering that grief and I'd made a hasty decision. So what I'm saying is put things off. Don't make hasty decisions. Don't make life-changing decisions. Work through your grief. Give yourself at least 3 or 4 years to work through that grief. Get rid of that grief so that you're back in your own mind and you're out of that state. The next one is I found grief can have quite a big influence on your actual physical body. When I lost my partner, he died of a heart attack, and in that week I was suffering really bad chest pains, and I actually thought that I was having a heart attack too. And what it was, I was just picking up on the energy of my partner who'd had the heart attack, because losing somebody is a very emotional and spiritual thing. and I was picking up on that energy from him. I went to the doctor, and I was also suffering from insomnia as well. I couldn't sleep, and when I did sleep I was having very vivid dreams. So you may have physical symptoms when you're going through the grief. It's not uncommon for somebody who's had a close person who's had a tragic car accident or something, and they've been killed instantly from a head injury to suffer pain in the head. That's not uncommon at all, because you do pick up on that person who you've lost their energy sometimes. So don't be surprised if you do get physical symptoms, and just, if you're worried at all, go to the doctor, and just for that, to reaffirm that there's nothing wrong. But quite often it is just because it's a spiritual thing happening. The next thing is grief can cause very erratic behaviour. As I was saying before, people cope in different ways to get through their grief, and it's not uncommon for people to act and do strange things, because there's time, even whilst you're going through that grief, you're questioning your own sanity. At times you feel like you're mental, because these things are just going around, and it's not uncommon for a person who doesn't drink to start to drink. It's not uncommon for a person who doesn't feel they're getting support in some way to go out and purposely do something. We've known several affairs to happen during this time. It's nothing personal. It's not anything that they're emotionally doing, but what they're doing is they're trying to get rid of the numbness and the hollowness that you feel, because when you're going through the grief, you have this deep hollowness within you, and you sometimes feel you're in a deep well, a dark well, and you're trying to claw up the walls, you're trying to get out of this well, and it's a numbness, anxiety, and it's like the only relief you ever get is when you go to sleep. But you wake up in the morning and it's there again. It's there again. It's knocking on your door, this grief. It just doesn't go away. It doesn't cease. So don't be surprised if and when you're around people that you'll see erratic behaviour happening. And if you are, just be there and listen to them, and just I would try to get them to talk it through. It's a good thing to talk it through, because even if it's hurtful, if it's hurtful to them, the pain is coming up to the surface, and that's where you want it. You don't want the pain within. You want that pain to come to the surface so that it can be released. But the next one I've got is, while life goes on for others, so does grief go on. And I did touch on that in the last question. I found the very hardest time I went through, going through grief, was the night after the funeral, when I went home, because for the 10 or so days before the funeral, I had people rallying around me, doing everything for me, and it was just totally wonderful having all those people around me. But then after the funeral has happened, it's like as though people who don't know what you're going through, when they don't have that grief, they just feel like he's dead and gone, life goes on. Not that they think that, but that's the way you feel in your mind that has this insidious grief going on. You're feeling forsaken, and that's the word I'm looking for. You just feel forsaken, like as though everybody has forgotten you. And I walked into this great big empty house, this great big empty bed. There was nobody there to talk to, and it was just night after night crying yourself to sleep. It was a terrible thing to go through. So what I'm saying is, the most important time for somebody going through grief is check in on them. You know, once a day, a 5-minute call, or pop around just to make sure they're okay, just to let them know that you're still on their mind, because that is very important. It's an important thing. Or even if you can take them out for a cup of coffee or something like that and let them talk and just listen to them. You don't have to really say anything, just be there and listen, let them vent, let them say, get their feelings to the surface. It makes all the difference to a person who's going through grief. The next one I have here is so this one's more on documentation. I found that I suffered the grief so badly that I was in shock and I couldn't cope with going through the funeral arrangements, so I had a brother and father step in for me, and my partner's nephew signed all the documentation. Well, as it turned out, there was a problem with the superannuation form that he had. He didn't have his dependents down on the form, and he had as the person to handle everything on the superannuation was his mother. Well, when she filled the paperwork out, she didn't write down that he had dependents, so she was taken to court, and she was going to be charged with fraud because she hadn't claimed that he had dependents. So therefore they thought she was taking all his money. Well, after that I was blamed for that. My father chased all that up because he'd come across all the paperwork and what had happened. So I was blamed for that, so the family turned against me, and because of that I had no say over the ashes. When his ashes were ready to be claimed, I couldn't claim the ashes, and his nephew took the ashes, and the family wiped their hands of me and had a private memorial service and would not tell me when the memorial service was, which was absolutely devastating to me. I was just totally devastated. So what I'm saying is, even though it's a time of terrible grief, and I've learnt this, and God forbid it ever happening to me again, but always make sure, even if you can't arrange the funeral, make sure that your signature is on the paper so that you have full control over everything that goes on. The next one is, I found also people came out of the woodwork. When I went through it, I had people I didn't even know coming to the door asking if I was all right. I had letters sent to me that I had no idea who some of these people were, or people I hadn't heard from for 30 years. I didn't know. I didn't know how they knew, but word spreads when there's a death, and you'll find people will just come out of the woodwork. And I was being brought food, people were giving me money, I had cards, I had flowers completely everywhere. My whole house was full with flowers. In fact, I got to the stage where I hated the flowers. It wasn't the actual act of them giving the flowers. I was so appreciative and so overwhelmed by people's generosity and the care and the amount of sympathy that they had for me. It was just overwhelming. I could not get over that fact. But the actual flowers themselves, every time I walked into the house, it just represented death for me. And in the end, it was years and years after that time, I couldn't have flowers in the house. I just refused to have flowers in the house. It was just a constant reminder that I'd lost my partner. Although, having said that, I was sent many cards and letters and words, and the words really struck home to me, and they were very meaningful to me. And there was one actual poem that was sent to me. It was sent to me on a fridge magnet, actually. It was the smallest thing that I ever got, but it meant the most to me. And with that poem, I just clung on to it. Every time I was sad, I went and read that poem. And I'd just like to read the poem in case it may help somebody else. It's called Death is Nothing at All. It's by Scott Holland. And this is how it goes. Death is nothing at all. It does not count. I have only slipped away into the next room. Nothing has happened. Everything remains exactly as it was. I am I and you are you. The old life that we lived so fondly together is untouched, unchanged. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my own old familiar name. Speak of me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity. Sorry, I can't say that word. Wear no forced air of sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes that we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without any effort, without the ghost of a shadow upon it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is absolute and unbroken continuality. What is the death but a negligible accident? Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am but waiting for you for an interval somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. Nothing is hurt, nothing is lost. One brief moment and all will be as it was before. This poem I read and it became very true for me because I had quite vivid dreams about my de facto, and it wasn't that many years after losing my de facto I lost my father as well, and I had the dreams of them coming to me. They were very vivid dreams, and to me it was very real because there was one time my father came to me and brought this other dark-haired woman. I didn't know who she was until she got up close, and I recognised her as my grandmother who had passed away 30 years before that. But the funny thing was, in reality, I'd never ever seen my grandmother with dark hair. She always had grey hair, white hair, and she used to put the purple tint in it. So I'd never ever seen her with dark hair. And in these dreams, they were so happy, they were so at peace, and they looked so healthy. And also I noticed in awake time, I was feeling the presence of my partner around me. There was a time I smelt him. He wore this particular aftershave and I smelt him as well. So whether or not you believe it, one thing I can say is they're always around you. Even though they have passed away, they're very close. The veil is very thin and they are there. They're watching over you and they don't want you to be miserable. They want your life to go on. Even though grief is a process, you can't rush grief. Grief has to be taken one step at a time, one day at a time and 1 week at a time. But you have to work through your grief. Don't rush it. Don't expect it to disappear because it won't. It's something that you can't get over. It's a hurdle that you can't get over. You must go through it. There's no other way to heal. But know this, that they are there. They're on the other side. They're waiting. They're around you and they want you to be happy. So just remember that each person who comes into our life, they've come into our life for a purpose. They've put a footprint on our life, on our path. Whatever we've learnt from them, they've left a part of them with us in our heart and in our minds. We've learnt something from their existence and they've passed their way and they've gone off on their path. So it doesn't matter if they're here or they're not here. You are carrying them with you because of the experiences and the love that you felt. So always remember them, look back at them and know that they're a wonderful memory, they're part of our life, but we still have to live our own life and we need to be happy and we need to be in a good frame of mind to move on and live that path. So I'd just like to finish there and thank you for spending the time listening to what I had to say. Thank you.